Did I forget to save that? Come on. All right, here we go. We should be good to go live now. Sorry about that.
Yep, I think we are live.
Okay, let's present. Okay, it should have VS Code up. Can y'all see it?
Not yet. I don't see anything. Yep, I can.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so here's the first one I made. So I can zoom in a bit. Yeah, like this one, I don't think it came out very well. Sort of have a line of preconditions and then attacks, and then everything kind of funnels into here. I might do this one over again. Yeah, I noticed this FOMOSec. I think you're kind of meant to mitigate this with policies.
So
sort of.
FOMOSec happens when you have a defense without an attack. Basically, you're being overly cautious.
I noticed that. I decided to leave it here. I had it come up a couple times on my other ones, and I did actually fix it. So yeah, I think I'm going to try and do this one over again. And yeah, this one was meant to be credential access. And yeah, so the way I did it was if we look at the actual source ADM, I just listed out a bunch of different attacks, and then I sort of scrambled to come up with defenses for them. And yeah, we got this that, yeah, I don't think it looks too great. These other ones, I kind of worked on the attacks and defenses one at a time. Let me see if I can. This one's the network attacks. So yeah, this is the source for this one.
Okay.
I'm still just using attack and defense. I also realized for defenses, you don't really need to have a full given win and then, right?
Yes. So it will not look for all of them, but when you want to implement a pen test, if you are not giving them a given and then, they don't know what your pen test script should result in. So let's assume you don't have a then step, which means the pen tester doesn't know what to expect if this attack or defense has succeeded.
Okay, so I should still try and have them in there, even though it mostly just looks at the win for a defense.
Yes. So
okay.
And also, if you want an attack to break a defense, you'll need a then statement in the defense.
Yep, I actually tried to implement that on my last one. So I had the ways you can kind of get around MFA, connecting to the defense here. Which, yeah, I think this is more how they're supposed to look, rather than just being kind of, I guess, really tall. Just a bunch of unique assumptions, and I guess these are preconditions.
Yeah,
a bunch of unique preconditions that all map to one attack, that all map to one or two defenses. Yeah, this one's not completely finished. There's still more I want to add here. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, this one doesn't have any defenses that get circumvented by other attacks. But yeah, so I guess the first thing I'd like to go over is how can we implement assumptions and policies?
So I'll start with assumptions. Assumptions are basically the given conditions that apply to the entire model. So let's say when you have preconditions where one precondition is getting connected to too many attacks and defenses, that's a prime candidate to make it as an assumption, in which case it will remove the gray box and put the assumption under the label.
Okay, so I guess I don't really have many that are doing that. So like public facing application exists, maybe that should be an assumption.
Yeah.
That's it's only going to 2, but I feel like
Mhm.
there's more it could probably map out to.
Yeah. So the way you do it is under the model, you put an assumption block.
That's definitely meant to go at the top, right?
Yeah. So assumption, give it
That
a title. Yeah.
probably needs a colon, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Do we need to call it anything specific?
It's better to give it a name, but it's not really necessary. Or say assumptions, network assumptions, or something like that. Yeah. Under that, give as many given statements as you want.
So just given.
Yeah.
Let's start with just public facing application exists.
You may want to remove
Yeah.
that from the attack because it will create two items then.
Okay, so then I would need to
Yeah.
get rid of it here. Does commenting work like that in ADM? Okay.
It
I'll
works.
just comment it for now.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no, that's different.
Yeah.
I think it's just these two.
And the good thing in VS Code is if you highlight that line, it will highlight every other line that matches it. And that's a very nice trick that you can use.
Yep, it was just those two.
Yeah. So now if you generate your ADM, yeah.
I gotta get the graph fizz back up.
No, you'll have to close it and reopen the previewer. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So what you see on top is now an assumptions block.
Okay. And then the reality just connects right to that. Okay.
Yes. So the
And
way
then-
you read the diagram,
all right.
the way you read the diagram is you apply all the assumptions as preconditions to every attack and defense.
Okay.
So that was the simpler part. Now comes policy. Policy is more of a construct where if you want to capture policies from the company. Now, every company has security policies and a bunch of security rules that they would like to enforce everywhere. And normally, when they say policy, you don't really capture it when you're doing security analysis nowadays. So, what we do
Right.
is add a policy block. Under policies, you can have two types of blocks, assumptions and defenses. So, you add policy colon and give it a title.
Let's see. Should I try to add it to the one I was just modifying then? Since we already added the assumption there.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I think that makes more sense.
Yeah. Policy colon network policy. Yeah. Now here you can have an assumption block or a list of defenses. The idea is that your policies should always list the defenses that implement that policy.
Okay, so then these would just be a string of defenses.
No. Sorry. So assumption blocks will have given statements. It's like the same assumption block, but under policies you have a bunch of assumptions.
Okay, so should I have the same given from up here then?
You can. Assumption block is optional because even policies need to make some assumptions. That's the only reason we have an assumption block there. The simplest policy is to just have a policy with its title and put a list of defenses.
Okay, so I guess I'll comment this out just to remind myself when I look at it later.
Yep. So is there a defense that you think will apply company's network policy?
Let's see. Which one would make more sense? I guess encrypting all connections.
Yeah, so
Pretty.
just cut paste them into this policy instead of redoing the same.
Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah.
I should probably comment it out here as well, right?
Yeah. 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 Now, if you save it and regenerate the model, yeah. So now what you see is a green box. A green
Yep.
box means policies, and every policy or every defense under that policy will be inside that box. Now, the idea is basically that for large models, you can take this diagram and then take a dump of all defenses that implement a policy. And then you can take it up to the management and say, for your policy, these are the 100 defenses we have. So or the CISO knows how good the policy was based on the number of defenses you have.
Okay.
But normally you should be talking to the company. Like if you are consulting with the company, you should ask them for a list of policies first to see whether a defense makes sense to be put under that. So there's some background research work that you'll have to do.
Okay, that makes sense. So this is something that maybe I should. Well, it's good to understand how it works. I'll say that.
So
And then yeah, I'll figure out how to apply that to some of the work I'm doing.
the way I normally do it is I just go with attacks and defenses first, basically get a brain dump of everything that I'm thinking, and then start tweaking this into policies and assumptions and so on.
Okay, that's good. That's essentially how I've been approaching it.
Mhm.
And also trying to just learn how to not make my models well, look like the first one.
Yeah. When you're working on a model, instead of VS Code, you should probably go with the web version because it's a fully browser based. It doesn't send anything to the server. So there is no backing server to actually support it. Everything is purely browser based. So you can start writing your attacks and defenses on the browser. Once you see the diagram looks good, just copy paste it into a new file in VS Code, and then you can go from there.
Okay, yeah. I've just been working in VS Code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is a little funky having to always use the command line to update things.
If you are in a workspace, there is a simpler command called ADMCI.
Yep, I have been using that. I don't know. For some reason, I just prefer to use the GraphViz viewer and sync it up. I don't know. For some reason, the zooming in and out's a little funky in the
Yeah.
image viewer for VS Code.
Mhm.
Can't really pan around as easily as I can with this.
True. That's true.
Okay, so that's good. The policies and assumptions aren't quite as complicated as I thought, so that's good to know.
The only limitation is that assumptions go on top and policies go at the bottom. If you move those around, it will probably throw up an error.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. I'll make sure I don't do that. So I guess the next thing to talk about then would be ADSM and then ADDB.
Yes.
Because especially Rod wants to sort of chain multiple of these models together.
Mm-hmm. So just chaining the models is still possible with ADM. You just say ADM graph and /, which means take the current directory and just look for all ADM files. So if you say ADM graph space /, yeah, it says I found 3 files in the current directory.
Then it'll update this.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, it would definitely look a little bit better if this one was a bit more clean.
Mm-hmm. But yes, what you will see is a diagram that's taller than wider because everything needs to connect to a reality. So it kind of gets listed like that. But this is the kind of diagram ADSM would anyway generate. So I wanted to let you know that you can do it without ADSM also if you need.
Okay, that's good to know. And is there any way to have them share policies and assumptions?
Yes, across models, you can, for example, if the same defense needs to connect to, let's say, endpoint security, you just use the same set of rules and it will have cross model connections also.
Okay. So I just don't have any of that. Well, I guess I don't have any policies in here either.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I can try to do that on my own time then.
Yeah.
That's good to know that'll work.
Yeah, what you can also do is for really large models, have a separate model file for policy alone, and then in all the other models, make a reference to that defense, or in the defense in that policy, make a reference to all the attacks that you're mitigating.
Okay.
So on the diagram, you'll have a separate gray box with just policies.
Okay. So maybe I'll try to do that as well
Mhm.
for the model I'm working on. That's cool that you can just use the ADM command to do this. I actually did not expect that it'd be that simple.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you could do this, what do you use ADSM for?
ADSM is more of an architecture tool where you lay out system in terms of entities and flows, and then you group ADMs under those entities and flows. Now the end ADM diagram will look exactly the same. It will just take all ADMs and make a single diagram. But along with it, it generates two other entity items. One is a markdown report. Second is an entity and flow level diagram where it tells you where are the attacks that haven't been mitigated and where are your rest of the recommendations and defenses. So let me start sharing my screen and
Here, I can take my screen share down then.
Mhm. Let me know if you can see my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet. Maybe it's just taking a second like it did with me.
Okay. Give me a second. Share screen. Entire screen. Okay, looks like there's some problem with StreamYard. Um, do you have to do something on your side to allow screen share? Like I can see a screen share box at the bottom on StreamYard, but
I don't know. I think.
yeah,
Oh,
it's up.
okay. There you go.
Yeah. So now that I'm in the workspace, I create something, a new file called test.smspec. SMspec is a YAML format or YAML schema to capture architecture level entities and flows. So because it's YAML, you can actually apply a schema using a YAML language server. Your workspace, I'm not sure whether you need to update because I've made some changes, but normally what you should have is this. Give me a second. Is this YAML language server from Red Hat? If you have this installed, it helps you improve your improve the structure of your YAML file.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I have that. I haven't updated it in a couple days.
Yeah, but I have made those changes to the workspace dev container details. So if you pull the workspace after this meeting, it should automatically reinstall this extension.
Okay. Yeah, I just did a git pull, and yeah, I see that it modified the dev container.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll restart it and get those modules
Yeah,
installed after this.
yeah. So what I do at the top is basically say YAML language server, and then say dollar schema equals this link. Now this link comes from my ADSM repository, where I have a schemas subdirectory and model schema JSON. This
Okay.
is basically used for checking if my YAML structure is right. So now when I say control space, I can use IntelliSense to automatically start filling my structure. So first thing I would say security model specification. Immediately it will give me a structure on the fields I need to fill. Let's give it say test model. And now there are three parts to this. You're basically saying what are your external entities. These are the ones that are not under your control, and normally you want to ignore them in terms of security recommendations. These may be user machines that are outside your network. These may be other things that are outside the scope of your analysis. Entities are the ones that are in scope, and here is where it will expect you to put some kind of ADM or recommendations. Flows are basically communication lines connecting entities and externals. So I'll take a sample setup where a user uses a browser to connect to my web application, and my web application is backed by a database. A very simple setup. So an external entity, basically, I start with. So if I press Control Space, I can pick human or program. An external entity can be a human or another program that's talking to your system. I'll just say human. So ID is user, generic end user, or I would just say end user, and in description I would say generic end user. And that's all you need for externals, because you just need a placeholder to show it on the diagram. Entities is where I start applying the rest of the stuff. Now, one recommendation is that you should typically include user's browser uh, inside the entities list, because you should normally have some expectations about the browser. For example, ask the user to run the latest version of the browser, ask them to not install malicious extensions. You tend to set some expectations, so it's better to keep it under entities. So I would say program ID is browser, type is either human or program, so I'll put it as a program, name browser, generic browser, and here you can create an entire ADM for browser where you can think of all attacks that can happen on a browser and what defenses you should recommend users to have. So for now I'll keep it empty, and because I have a browser, I can say for user he has an interface through this program, because users won't directly interact with our system. They'll either come through a browser or a client application. Now I start adding the server side stuff. Again, I add a program. Let's say ID is server, type is program, name is application server, my product. And again, I'm not going to fill in the ADMs because that will take me down another rabbit hole. Since we already know ADMs, I'm going to skip those. Similarly, like a server, I'll put a database. And the description is also application database. So this basic sets up a simple architecture for me. Now I need to show the flows. So user interaction is the ID, description user interaction. I'll just use the same name here. Now you say who is the sender and who is the receiver. Sender is user, receiver is browser. And again, for flows, you can have ADM. For example, if you have TLS as one of your connections, you want to give them a bunch of attacks and defenses and recommendations. So similarly, I'll add a few more flows. The second one is client request. And the sender is browser and receiver is server. Similarly, between server and database, right? Record. These are just hypothetical scenarios that I'm creating. So this should be a description. Sorry. Write user data, write user record to database. Sender is server and receiver is database. This sets up a very simple architecture for me. Now I can run the ADSM command. When you run just ADSM, it'll tell you what you can do with it. Similar to ADM, you can stat it. You can generate specific diagrams out of it or generate the full report. So as always, I'll just stat it first to see if everything looks good. So it's going to tell me that I have a test model. Now, ADDB is something I'll come to later. So it will throw up an error if it doesn't find an ADDB. But otherwise, it should be able to show your model if it's written correctly. Now, ADSM, I'll directly go with report because this is normally what you would like. You should be generating every time because it generates a diagram as well as a markdown report. So ADSM report test.sm spec will now generate a report directory under which it will generate a simple markdown report. If I open it as a markdown preview.
Okay. That looks good.
Yeah. So it'll basically tell you where you can find the security models. It's under resources. So when I put the dot, give me a second. Yeah. When I open the .sm file, again, it's graph-based. It'll show me end user connecting to browser, connecting to application, connecting to database. Now this A, D, M, and R are specific parameters inside each entity I'll come to. You also have your ADM. Currently, since I don't have any ADMs linked, it'll just generate an empty diagram.
Right. And this would be the full ADM of everything that you told about. Okay. And we just didn't have anything.
Yes. So what you normally do is, let's assume for browser, you'll have, let's say, browser, it should be in quotes, browser.adm. Then you may have chrome.adm and so on. So you can have a bunch of ADMs for each entity. And normally if you put a file name and it cannot find it, then it will start throwing up an error. So you know that you have put an ADM, but it's not created. So it kind of helps you figure out what's wrong in the system. Now, the next immediate thing, normally when you start analyzing an existing system, you start with architecture and go down to the details. And when you start looking at architecture, you typically see that you can give them some immediate recommendations without creating any ADMs. So there is a section called recommendations. Now it's a list. So in case of browser, I can say use the latest version of your browser and another. You normally don't need them in quotes. So use the latest version of your browser and don't malicious extensions. So now when I generate the report again, what you see is this recommendations gets listed here. So tomorrow you don't have to give them the YAML file. Rather, you generate this markdown, export it to PDF, and they have entity-based grouping of all recommendations that they may want.
No, that's good. Yeah, we'd like to be able to send that out.
Yeah. Similarly, you can have mitigations is another section. Now, recommendations and mitigations kind of have an overlap, but the idea is that recommendation is something you request them to do. They may or may not do it. Mitigations are something that you have identified that has already been fixed. So if they have security controls in place, you may want to capture it under mitigations.
Okay.
So under mitigations, let's say users laptop is monitored or managed by IT. So if IT already has some kind of a monitoring or management system, they can figure out whether the browser has malicious extensions. So this is a kind of mitigation that you can still have. Again, I'll generate it. What you see here is again a mitigation section similar to recommendations. Now when you, yeah, any questions?
No, nothing yet. This is all pretty straightforward so far.
Yeah. So when I, sorry, sometimes this report generation doesn't overwrite files. Seems to be a Visual Studio Code problem sometimes. So if I don't see my updates, I normally just delete the report directory and recreate it. So now when you create your diagram, you see that there is M equals 1 and R equals 2.
Okay.
R is your recommendations, M is your mitigations, A and D are your attacks and defenses.
Yep, and those would come out of an ADM file you specify under there.
Yep, correct.
Okay.
And if there is an attack that's not mitigated, the one that the box with the yellow color, then this whole browser box will appear in red. So in your threat model, you know that there are entities that where there are some attacks that are not mitigated. So let me just create a simple ADM. Browser.adm model browser security attack running an older version of browser, and I think this should be good enough to get your diagram generated. I think it's still generating. Oh, sorry. If not, let me just delete this directory and come back again. So report, I have SM. It's still not generating.
Do you need to add the ADM in the SM spec?
Correct, you're right.
All right, so it doesn't automatically pick up everything then.
It won't pick up automatically. Yeah. Now if I, yep, running an older version, and here if I, sorry, this is ADM, and if I open the security model, it still shows an attack, but it's not being shown as in the box because the attack is empty at this point. So when user installs so let's try again. Yeah. Now,
yep. Okay, it's red now.
Yeah. So every time you have an attack model where there are these yellow boxes.
Yep, the unmitigated attack.
On the architecture level, you will see red boxes also. It won't tell you what's not mitigated because that's part of your ADM diagram. But this now gives you a nice way to figure out where the problems are and start dealing with them. And if you go back to your report, open preview. Yeah. Now it will show all the unmitigated attacks under a risk section.
Okay.
So every risk, like it's a flat list of entries, but it will tell you where it sourced it from. So under entities, there was a browser entry where this was found. This pretty much is what ADSM is doing. It's just a way to collect metadata about your target and start generating reports out of it.
Okay, so this would kind of come in towards the end of the sort of ADM step, right? So you try to make ADMs for all your various components, and then you would make one of these to tie them all together.
It really depends on your system knowledge. If you're looking at a system that you have never analyzed, you start top down. You create the
Okay.
ADSM first, where you break the system up into entities. So let's say you are talking to a company and they say, this is our system setup. This is my network diagram. These are where my servers and workstations are. At that time, it's better to start with ADSM because you can lay out the entire system into a big
Right.
architecture
Okay.
diagram.
Yeah, that makes sense because you really only have the high level information at that point.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And at that point, if you see something's wrong, like if it starts raising red flags, you can put it under mitigations and recommendations. And without ADM itself, you can give them enough value to start with and then go back and start deeper analysis.
All right, that's great. I'll have to start testing around with this. Could you send me that little comment that goes at the top?
Yeah.
Just to make sure I have it.
Yep.
Let's see. If you just put it in the chat, I should be able to get it.
Give me a second.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Even otherwise, if you go to the ADSM GitHub repository, sorry, security design, ADSM. So, oh, sorry, not workspace. Sorry, it should be under Vinay Programs ADSM. Yeah. If you go to the ADSM repository, there is the schemas directory under which you have model schema. When you click on raw, you can copy this link and still put.
Okay.
So it's exactly the same. I'm here to set up a server to host these schemas so that you can reduce the URL length. That's something I'll be doing in the next few weeks. So maybe next time we meet, it's a much simpler URL for you.
Okay. Well, no, this works at least now that I understand it.
So that's ADM. Now, ADDB is a repository of ADM entries. You want to develop an ADDB because you don't want to recreate the same entity over and over everywhere. And normally for common technologies and common tools that you have seen multiple customers use, it's better to have a single ADDB and just make copies for every customer.
Yep.
So ADDB can exist anywhere. Again, it's a directory with a bunch of files. So I'll just create one here. And what I do is in the model, I say ADDB, and I need to give the absolute path to the location. Currently, that's a limitation with ADSM because I haven't yet implemented other ways to source it, let's say source it from a server and stuff. That feature is still yet to be implemented. For now, it just looks for a directory location on your local machine. So I would say /ADDB. Now, browser is something you can definitely create an ADB entry for. So let me say browser.smspec. Now, compared to your ADSM, there's a slight difference in the models in the language server link. Here, instead of saying model schema, you have to use component schema because you're defining components in each file, not the entire model. So now if I say this is a program, ID browser, type is again program, browser description generic, security recommendations for browsers. Now again, you can have your own ADM for every component entry there. For now, I'll just keep it empty. And what I'll do is I'll move these recommendations and mitigations, or rather the ADM recommendations and mitigations, into this component. So now I need to move the browser.adm also into this because it's looking into its local directory. So now I have it. What I can do is I can go back here, remove all of this, and say the base is from ADDB. And the way you say it is you say ADDB colon and the exact ID that you have given here. So when you say ADDB colon browser, it knows that it needs to go look at ADDB and not really try to find it locally. I still need to give it an empty ADM list because that's a mandatory field. So now when I generate a report, my report will still say that this is coming from the base specification. So if I preview here, now you see that recommendations are sourced from the base and not your actual model. What I also have is a pre-defined or an existing ADDB repository in my GitHub repo, and it gets copied into the workspace. So it's under user share ADDB. When I list it, it already has a bunch of ADDB entries that you can leverage. What I'll do is I'll just copy it into my current directory. So I'll remove this ADDB directory and just copy it here. So now I have an ADDB, and under that I have technology and then MySQL. So instead of browser, let's say so for browser, I'll not have anything as a base, but for database, I would definitely like to add a lot of recommendations because it holds a lot of sensitive data. So now I can say base is EDB, and under technology database, I have MySQL, or I can use a generic DB server recommendation. So when I go to MySQL, I have ID as db.mysql. So it does simple string matching, so you can have any structure out here. I can say at version 1.2, for example. I can have an other entry here for version of MySQL 1.3. So you can have component that address specific version of certain technologies. So I would say ADDB and db.mysql. Now when I generate my ADSM report, you see you have a huge list of recommendations just for database. So the idea about ADDB is you build this huge repository offline for your company, for your customer, whichever makes more sense. And then you maintain it. And every time you generate a threat model for them or ADM for them, you just source it from ADDB. And even when I'm putting in an ADM, I can pull that for databases. For example, databases doesn't have it. For example, Golang. Golang has a bunch of recommendations, and there is a small ADM for Go language. So I can say the language this server is written in is ADDB Go. Give me a second. So the Go spec, yeah, it's lang.go, not just ADDB. So now when I do this and regenerate the report, in my markdown, I now see Go related, give me a second. I see Go related recommendations. And now when I pull the ADM up, I see there is an ADM generated for Go that was sourced from ADDB.
Nice. We'll have to start building one then.
Yeah. And you can go to this location. So it's github.com/securitydesign-addb. If you go here, you will actually see the ADDB that I am working on currently. And these
Okay, and
entries,
that's what ends up in the workspace.
yes, that's what gets copied. Now in your workspace, instead of you moving it into your workspace, you can always say user share ADDB, and it will still pull it from there. Only thing is that you can't see what's there in ADDB because workspace will not show it to you.
Right,
So,
it'll only show you the workspace folder there. It's the only one that's linked.
yeah.
Okay.
So normally what I do is I open it up in a browser, see what's available, and then start putting that here.
Okay. That makes sense.
That's pretty much about ADDB and ADSM.
All right. Well, yeah, I definitely still have a bit of ways to go with the just the basic ADM.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely gonna start with trying to implement some policies
Mm-hmm.
and assumptions to clean up my models a bit. But yeah, that's really helpful, and it's good to know there's still more to learn.
Yeah. So if you normally when we work on a project, you will have multiple people working on it. So you may have somebody lay out the architecture while others are working on specific ADMs. So if you are a team of security analysts working on it, you can probably divide ADM and ADSM work between yourselves.
Okay.
I know Greg and Kaden have been watching all the time. I don't know whether you've understood everything or it sounded too confusing for you.
It's all new, but it's good. No, I followed along.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of in the same way. It's still pretty confusing for me. I mean, I'm kind of starting from the ground up on virtually everything cybersecurity and coding. So I'm following the best that I can and with what I know and what I can take away. But from what I'm understanding, all of it is very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rod and Joe have been working on these things, so they should be able to help. And if you guys are part of the Discord channel, I can always answer questions if you have specific questions on these.
Thank you, Mr. Venkatesh. That's really helpful.
So it's back to you, Rod.
Do you have any updates on the community? I know you were building the community out at the end of last year. Any updates as far as like I really would like to become a moderator, and Joe and I have been working on models.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know if you had any updates or guidance on how that process was going for defining it.
So currently, I don't have a list of moderators set up. And again, like I said last time, we are yet to create rules about such a database.
Mm-hmm.
Because currently there is no such database available on the internet. We are basically starting from a clean slate. Mm-hmm. So if there are folks who would like to moderate this along with me, just let me know and we can start having separate discussions on how to moderate this repository. And that's why I have a separate GitHub account for this, because I don't want to mix personal account with this ADDB repository. So we can start discussion on what should be the process of accepting submissions. Let's say tomorrow Greg wants to submit for a new technology. What are the minimum details we need? What are the list of sources we need so that we know that he pulled it from a known source? So the list of do's and don'ts that we need can always be decided. And I need a few moderators to sit down with me to define that to start with.
But definitely, I can't speak for Joe, but I think I'd be interested. But we would. I'm thinking over the next couple months, we're going to have a lot of experience just kind of daily going through this. So hopefully it lends itself well to becoming put together quality models. So
yeah, there is a good chance we'll be working with ADMs for pretty commonly used components. So it would be nice to contribute.
Yeah. It's just that I want this repository to be public So anything that you put in there is available to everybody on the internet without any charge or without any check. So what you submit to ADDB is something you should be comfortable that everybody on the internet will be able to see. So these things we'll discuss as part of a moderation, but that's a general thumb rule I'm telling everyone.
Okay, I think that sounds good. Well, we'll definitely have to take you up on another meeting, separate meeting, and thank you for the time. And I know Joe has you got something at the top of the hour. So
Yeah, I do need to drop here and get ready for that next meeting.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you, Vinay. It's as always. It's just before you become big, we just want to take advantage of the opportunity to be able to meet with you. So thank you.
Everybody in the security community is like a family. I think it's not like I am big, you are small kind of. I don't think that happens in security. At least the good ones who attend DEF CON, they don't talk like that.
Yeah, no, but we appreciate it though. You're a very smart guy, and it's just a real joy to have the access. So thank you. Thank you. Okay, everyone, I'll go ahead and close the live stream out, and have a great weekend, great long weekend, and we'll see you guys next week.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. See ya.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.